Hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, here today to talk about how the great pretenders are coming for the great state of Idaho. Now, by pretenders, I mean politicians and sometimes voters who want to pretend to be something that they're not. And the greatest tool that they are possibly going to be handed, depending on how the vote goes this November, is a thing called Proposition 1. I want to start with a recent article from the Idaho Freedom Foundation talking about how the dirty secret about Proposition 1 is it would encourage political candidates to lie to you. Now, I know that sounds like pretty strong language, right? So, well, since when would a politician lie? But I still believe very strongly that politicians, for the most part, will do whatever they need to do to stay in office, and they will say whatever they need to say to get you to vote for them. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at the big lie that can come along with Prop 1 and how it actually encourages candidates to lie to you. Again, this is from the Idaho Freedom Foundation. You can go to idahofreedom.org if you want to check this out for yourself. The article tells us one half of the initiative, ranked choice voting, is confusing, error-riddled, nearly impossible to audit. But the other half, and this is the part that will undo much of the progress conservatives have made in the legislature in the last few election cycles, is the part titled open primaries. But there's something even darker and far more insidious involved in this proposal. Proposition 1 would allow candidates for office to lie to you on your election ballots. And here's how it works. So let's get into the meat of the actual proposal itself. The long ballot title, as outlined by the Idaho Secretary of State's office, shows you exactly how it encourages politicians to lie. It says, first, this measure would abolish Idaho's party primaries. Under current law, political parties nominate candidates through primary elections in which party members vote for a candidate to represent the party in the general election. Now, the mantra for proponents of Prop 1 is, well, the problem is not everybody gets to participate in those party primaries. Actually, you can participate. You're not held back, so long as you're willing to become a member of that party. But see, a lot of people don't want to do that, or I'll pretend then if that's what I can do. And watch how Prop 1 gives them the opportunity to pretend to be what they are really not. The initiative creates a system where all candidates participate in a top 4 primary, and voters may vote on all candidates. So the top 4 vote earners for each office would advance to the general election. Pay attention to this next part, though. Candidates could list any affiliation on the ballot, but would not represent political parties and need not be associated with the party they name. Did you catch that last part? Because that's the important part. A candidate can tell you, oh, yes, I'm running as a Republican, but they can list whatever affiliation they want to on the ballot, but they won't represent the political parties, meaning there's no accountability, and they need not be associated with the party that they name. That's the problem right there. That encourages people to pretend to be something that they aren't. And while this may be a necessary component of the top 4 primary system, it would also allow for rampant dishonesty among candidates. Now, the backers of this proposition are wrong, but they're not dumb. They know Idaho is trending more conservative by the day. They realize that left-wing ideas and candidates will never win elections, at least not on their merits. So they have to rig the game so their left-wing darlings can fly under the radar and get elected. How? By pretending to be something that they're not. Where have we seen that before? Ah, yes, Clint Hostetler reminds us of another case of pretending that seems to be pretty common. Prop 1, he says, is like men in women's sports. They can't win in their respective sport, so they have to invade as imposters and destroy the sport in general to win. By the way, maybe it'll interest you to know that I believe it was, let me think for a second, University of Nevada, Reno became the 5th school to choose to forfeit their women's volleyball game rather than play against a man who acts and believes that he is a woman on San Jose State University's team. 5 schools now have forfeited. Now, to be fair, the first 4 were very careful in their language when they announced that they would forfeit. They didn't give a strong reason as to why. But in the case of University of Nevada, Reno, school officials said, oh, well, our girls are going to play that game just as scheduled on October 26th. But the team members are like, whoa, wait a minute. Nobody talked to us about this. And the team members themselves took a vote and chose to forfeit the game rather than play against a player who is pretending, a man pretending to be a woman. And the reasons they cited in their statement that they gave regarding their decision to forfeit were, it was concerns over fairness in women's sports as well as safety. Those 80-mile-an-hour spikes have actually injured opponents, and yet people want to pretend that there's no difference between somebody who was born a male and someone who has been biological female her whole life. So I commend all of those schools for, first of all, taking a stand, but I also think that's a great, Clint Hostetler is on the right target when he says, yeah, it's about pretending to be something that they're not, and it ruins it for everyone. So likewise, I think we could see this happening with Idaho's elections. Now, one of the tools that people are using to try to make the case that, well, the reason we have to have Prop 1 is we need to take care of, they use a number of different words, extremists, the fringe, the far right, but apparently there's some bad actors out there who are breaking with the consensus of those who know best. I'm going to show you an example of what this looks like. This is from one of Idaho's great pretenders, Russell Mann, who pretends to be a Republican, who says Idaho GOP has been hijacked by the fringe with rule changes, enforcement, and ignoring. Now, when he talks rule changes, he means basically they're solidifying when you run as a Republican, you need to govern as a Republican, meaning there's a platform you can refer to. And if you're going to go govern outside of that, go run as something else. Enforcement simply is another word for accountability. To him, it's a scary word, but that's because he's pretending. Pretenders don't get too far when there is accountability. And of course, ignoring, well, maybe it's because he doesn't have enough followers. I'm not sure. But they've mastered keeping what he calls traditional Republicans off the ballot. And yes, Russell pretends to be a traditional Republican. In fact, he says all the other Republicans who've made these marvelous gains since the COVID lockdowns, which, don't you understand, that's what opened people's eyes. That is when Idaho finally started making some moves back toward its conservative roots, because people realized we have let government get way too powerful, way too expensive, way too involved in our lives. But in the pretender's mind, Prop 1's number one effect is removing the fringe's power to keep Republicans off the ballot. That's why they're terrified. Well, if it was keeping people who actually govern like Republicans off the ballot, yeah, that would be a really good reason. But no. Prop 1 is intended to keep conservative Republicans off the ballot by watering down, corrupting, and confusing the process to make it easier to people who don't share those traditional Republican values onto the ballot and into power. But again, you need to study out this issue for yourself. I can't tell you how to vote on it. I'm just telling you there's more to it than simply it gives everyone a voice. That's pretend as well. So let's talk for just a moment about this weaponization of words like fringe and extreme and how that is used to leverage people into basically shutting up and falling into line. This is a wonderful article from the Substack of a writer named Ann Tomoko Rosen. She says, extremism is the weapon du jour to round everyone back into a limited discourse that allows status quo beneficiaries to play it safe and remain within the realms of state-sanctioned virtue. Now, she says it's been co-opted as a trigger word designed to disparage and dismiss anyone who dares question the distorted values that political parties on either side prop up as social justice, equity, inclusion, democracy, and freedom. Pretty sure that's what traditional Republicans, would support. That doesn't sound like a traditional Republican to me. That sounds like pretty far left wing kind of dogma. Anyway, Ann Tomoko Rosen says, it's a common formula and it relies on the assumption the reasonable positions on the welfare of children, election integrity, January 6th, inclusion, public health, environmental issues, immigration, and individual freedom have already been decided by consensus and are necessary for the greater good. Anyone who challenges these positions is therefore a threat to the greater good. Where do we hear that kind of language coming from in Idaho? We hear it coming from the pretenders. We hear it from Jim Jones, who pretends to be a Republican. We hear it from the Main Street Caucus, which pretend to be Republicans. We hear it from, Reclaim Idaho, again, pretending to be traditional Republicans. Don't be fooled by the pretenders. Okay, their words are easy to hear and sometimes easy on your ears, but do their actions and do their stated beliefs, the things that they back, do they line up with their principles? Often the answer is no. And that's why you must beware the great pretenders who've set their sights on the great state of Idaho. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Press club or bias, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like